Good.
Well, let's jump in. Hope you're all having a great week. Welcome to another Friday conversation. We're actually publishing this to our Elementum Facebook page. We normally do this on Friday in our group for college and young adult ministry leaders, but Ben and I were talking, and just periodically we'd love to pull out some just opportunities to go to a little bit broader context. And we thought today we're going to be jumping in for a few minutes talking about productivity. It's been one of those things that we have consistently heard from different ministry leaders that for a lot of people is a struggle trying to figure out how to be productive, how to position themselves to get things done. And so, in fact, Ben and I have been working, we'll tell you about this a little bit later, but we've been working on just even some resources for different leaders that we're working alongside. And so, Ben, how you doing today?
Doing well. I'm happy it's Friday. It's been a good week, though. We've had lots of fun conversations and good opportunities to work with the ministry leaders that we get to work with around the country.
Yeah, it's been good. Okay, let's jump into productivity. So why don't you kind of let's do a little bit of framing first before we jump into it. I think I want to talk about what it isn't and then what it is, just to kind of give people a sense of why productivity and what do we mean, and then kind of set the stage for some foundational pieces to jump into this conversation.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing before we went live on here, we talked a little bit about you kind of get two types of people in ministries. There you get people who are more relationally wired, where they really thrive in meeting with people, conversations, and the dynamics of relationships. More often than not, those people tend to not be as good at the execution part of, which is an essential part of productivity. And you get the other side, which are people who are more structured. They're maybe a little bit less relational, and they're more like, hey, we know our tasks. Let's get the tasks done. And one of the things I think that is really worth pointing out is that productivity is not solely about getting more stuff done. It's not about a new mode of finding a more efficient way to get through your checklist. That's helpful. I mean, that's a part of what productivity is, but it's not the full story. It also isn't just about tips and tricks and apps and stuff. Like there's a slew of apps, to-do list kind of stuff, tools like Evernote that speed up things and make you more productive in the sense of checking more tasks off your list more quickly, which is helpful, but that's not the ultimate goal, right? Productivity is this. I think one thing I want to say as a positive comment on it is I think as ministry leaders, productivity and getting those tasks done is about getting things done so that we're freed up. Love the people that God has called us to love and to make disciples. As we're called to make disciples.
Yeah, totally. So let's talk about kind of frame what it is, right? So what it isn't, it's not about getting more things done, tips and tricks. But productivity is really about this idea of aligning what we're doing, our activities, our tasks, our to-do list around our mission and our values, right? So the things that we've been called to do, like how do we be intentional with those things to make sure, and even I was thinking about, like we had talked about this even a few days ago, about aligning our activities and making sure that we're actually doing the right things. Just because you have a long to-do list, right? Just because you have 15 things that you're going to do this Friday or this week or next month, the question really is are you really doing the right things? Like, are those the things that are actually going to help contribute and move things forward? And then
a lot of the times the busyness is actually a way to avoid doing the things that are important but more difficult.
Yeah, for sure. Because ultimately, I think that there's freedom when it's not just about accomplishing a certain set of tasks, but you realize that those tasks are going to align with your mission, your vision, your values, and it's going to give you the space and the freedom to love people, to love God more, to engage in the ministry that God has ultimately called us to do. I think and that's what I love, even that you talked about earlier, is the ultimate goal is not getting things done, right? The ultimate goal is to create some space for us to love God and love people more, and to do the ministry ultimately that He's called us to do.
Yeah. And I think so. Maybe before we talk about a couple things that are essential for being actually productive as a ministry leader, I think let's I got a good question that comes to my mind is what are maybe some obstacles that you've seen, Andy, as you talk with leaders that kind of blocks them from or is preventing them from being productive, getting the things that they need to get done.
Yeah, I think one of the major obstacles is always being in catch up mode. So
Yeah.
like you get to your almost like you're like, okay, what do I got to do now? What do I got to do now? What do I got to do now? And sometimes when we get in that rush of like, okay, it's Monday morning, what do I got to do? I'm running
Yeah.
behind, and all of a sudden we just start doing things, right? Because we don't have enough like space to be able to step back and ask these questions like, okay, are these the right things that we're doing? And so I think the one of the big hurdles is lack of organization and just kind of the
Mm-hmm.
space to do that. But I think also is thinking thinking about just like uh, almost like viewing productivity as an enemy,
Yeah. Like
of like
less spiritual.
less spiritual. Like, yeah, so like, well, I don't do that. I just like go in the spirit, and I just like
Yeah.
focus on relationships and whatever. And I feel like that if that's kind of the way that we swing to, in a lot of ways, I think we're missing out on some huge
Yeah. Yeah.
opportunities. So
Yeah.
I'd love
For
to hear,
sure.
what are some hurdles maybe that you've seen too?
Yeah, yeah. I think fear is a big one, honestly. Like we talked about, one of the essential things of productivity is it's not just doing stuff; it's doing the right stuff. And usually, the stuff that's most important, most valuable to the call that we've received as people who are leading ministries is stuff that's not easy to do.
Mhm.
So we tend, even if you're the kind of person who makes a to-do list, I find this in myself regularly. Like it's easy for me to be like, I got a ton of stuff I got to do, that one's going on the last, that's the last on my
Yeah.
list, rather than putting the most important but most challenging thing as the first thing on my task
Mhm.
list. So I think that fear, and tied in with that, another one I've seen several times is some people avoid trying to be productive or organizing some of that stuff because they don't want to fail. They say, well, if I don't commit to doing it, I won't fail at doing it. Which I think those are both tied into fear. um, I think that's outside of what you said. I think that's the primary hurdle that comes to my mind.
Yeah.
um, so let's talk about the couple essential things that are foundational to productivity, and this first one is one of the first things we'll talk about in the online course that we're doing on productivity for ministry leaders, because I think it is so essential, but it's so radically counterintuitive, that if you don't start here, everything else is going to get out of whack. And it's the fact that as disciples of Jesus, as created beings, we are meant to work from rest,
Mm.
not work for rest. Because the way that most people, I think, come to it, both in the world and in ministry, is we come to our week, whatever your time off is, we come to this beginning of our week and say, I've got to get all this done so that I can get to my time off. When in reality, the biblical model is kind of the opposite of that, is out of the overflow of your time of rest, you work out into the activity. So a couple biblical backings for that. First one, I think this is most foundational, is Genesis 1 and 2, right? God creates the world in 6 days. Adam and Eve are created on the sixth day. When they're created, God gives them potentially one of the most significant commands, like a really big task to accomplish. And he tells them, fill the earth, subdue it, rule over it. Essentially, you're my image bearers, spread my image across the world. So they're in this little garden, that God's kind of set up all nice for them. And the rest of the world, presumably, is this big wilderness, that's kind of empty and barren. So God said, hey guys, here's the huge job. You got to fill the world and take care of it for me. We got two people, massive task. First thing that God does the following day is, hey, we're taking a day off, guys. We're not working. Um, I mean, like, how counterintuitive is that, right? If you were to
Yeah.
get hired, like let's say you got a college campus, you're hired as a college ministry, young adult ministry leader at this massive church, and the senior pastor says, all right, you're here. Here's your huge mission. Your first job, take a month off. That's so like, just
Yeah.
like, how does that even fit? Usually we go in the opposite direction of that. But biblically, what's so foundational is that we have to begin with coming from a place of connection with God and rest. Jesus demonstrates that in his ministry.
Mhm.
Some of us have had crazy moments in ministry. I highly doubt if any of us have had craziness to the point where people are sleeping outside the houses where we're at, waiting for us to wake up in the morning to heal them and preach to them. That's the kind of stuff that Jesus had going on. And he still prioritizes making space in his life to retreat, to rest, to be alone, to get to quiet places. So I think that's like, if you want to be productive, it's got to start with the opposite of productivity, with rest and encounter with God.
Yeah, which is, it's interesting because in some ways we elevate being a workaholic in our
Mm-hmm.
culture. Like, ooh, that person's working 80 hours or whatever, and
Yeah, yeah.
is going to collapse. And I just think that that's so unbiblical. Of, yes, we're supposed to work hard, be intentional, but there's a rhythm that we've been created to work from and to be a part of. And I think to get outside of that is going to be detrimental to productivity, to us living the ways that God called us to be a part of.
Yeah. And that really ties into, I think, that point of you got to start with the end in mind. If your
Yeah.
productivity is just about checking tasks off the list, then you're never thinking about, am I going to make it to the end? Am I
Yeah.
going to make it through the long haul?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's, Ben had mentioned one of the other points that we wanted to draw out is this idea of working with the end in mind, right? Very, very rarely are we able to kind of step back, and we talk about this a lot with our elementum leaders, is like reverse sequence things. Like, think about
Mm-hmm.
the end first. What do you want your ministry to be? What do you want your family to be like? And then how do you kind of walk that backwards with where you're at right now, that can then help you begin to move forward? And so I think, thinking in some of those key aspects of like values, mission, goal setting, like all of those things really have this component where we need to understand that we need to know ultimately, what is our to-do list contributing towards? Are we just putting things on the list to put things on the list, or are we just taking things on our list, maybe that your boss or coworker gives you? And I think there's moments where we need to step back and almost like look up and look off into the distance and say, if I accomplish these things, will it accomplish the end goal of ultimately where I'm trying to get towards? Anything you want to
And
add on that at
I
all?
think that goes back to that idea of starting from a place of rest, because really the more, I'd say, the more busy you are, the more frantic that your moment feels, the more important it is for you to make some space in your schedule and step back, look at that big picture. Because the tendency, the more frantic, the more overwhelming the
Yeah.
moment feels, the more you have on your to-do list, the more important it is for you to prioritize. Because odds are the stuff that you're going to default to do is the stuff that is natural and easy, which is probably the stuff that is less important and less essential. Because if you're the leader, your job is to own those difficult things,
Mm-hmm.
because most likely a lot of the other people on your team, your volunteers, can bear some of the weight of some of the other ministry stuff, the
Yeah.
simpler, more entry level tasks. So working with the end in mind is so huge. I think if you don't take the time to step back and evaluate, where am I trying to go, you're not going to successfully get there.
Yeah. Which in essence is really vision, right? And,
Yeah.
and that's a key part to productivity too, is basically what vision is. It's like a preferred destination. It's a picture of a
Yeah.
preferred future that you have. And I think that that's so critical to productivity. It's so critical for us, beginning with that end in mind, is really creating a picture of what you want your ministry to look like, who you want to be as a leader, what you want your family, how you want to parent, like all of those things is a
Mm-hmm.
part of vision. And I think the challenge in that though is, and we see this all the time, Ben, is that people don't understand that vision is both long-term and short-term,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's not just something that's way out there, but it's also like tied into the immediate. Now, the interesting thing is most people are usually wired one or the other. Like, most people are either like long-term dreamers, kind of vision type people. They can see 3 years from now, 5 years from now, or they're kind of in this bubble of like, what am I doing this week? the crazy thing is, and what we've learned over all these years of doing ministry, is you need both. Like, you need to have that long term um, tied to that short term. And if you're somebody who prefers long term, you might need some help in kind of creating some short term actions. Or if you're a person who kind of tends more towards the immediate and what's happening, you might need some help kind of drawing out of like, okay, what does this mean 3 years from now? What does this mean 5 years from now? One of the best tools that we use is Will Mancini has in his book God Dreams. He has this thing called the Horizon Storyline, and what he does is he breaks up vision into 4 different sections, like a picture. Like, if you were to imagine vision as being a picture and you saw that picture on the wall, there would be different layers in that picture. You got things that are way off into the distance and things that are in the midground and things that are right in front of you. And so what he proposes is really kind of 4 different time lengths in vision. He talks about 90 days, he talks about 1 year, talks about 3 years, 10 plus years. And that I would encourage you even to get that tool, and for you to think about your ministry or yourself in that context, will help you think both short term and both long term.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's great. Super. You could even Google it and find the general framework for it. It's really easy to implement. Um, the deeper you dig into it, the more beneficial it's going to be. But on maybe a more like immediately practical level, even if you don't have 5-year vision for your ministry, I think one of the things that both Andy and I do, and we help a lot of our ministry leaders do, that I think is hugely helpful in organizing your week and your time in a way that's going to actually not just keep you busy, but actually enable you to be productive, is thinking about what are the 3 most important things that I need to do in the next week. Now, if you have a 3-year or 1-year kind of goal set out there, usually those things, at least one of them is going to feed into that long-term goal. But that's something like for me, usually Friday, as I'm wrapping up kind of my official work week, I'm ended my week by reviewing how did stuff go in the last week. Take about 20 minutes to do this, tops maybe 10 on an average week. How did the last week go? What did I get done? What's left undone? What do I need to follow up on? And then what are the 3 most important things for me to accomplish next week? Bill Hybels, I remember hearing at a global leadership summit conference years ago, he talked about 6 by 6. Same idea. He's saying, what are the 6 most important things for me to do in the next 6 weeks? And then as much as possible, same with these big 3, as much as possible, I'm going to only work on those 3 things or those 6 things. And so what that looks like for me personally is when I'm writing my to-do list on a day-by-day basis, the first 3 things on my task list for that day are going to be things, just because I normally kind of tend to work from the top of my task list down, are going to be things that tie into those big 3. So super useful, man. Like even if you're watching this Friday afternoon, take 20 minutes this afternoon and sit down and say, okay, let's review, take 10 minutes to review my last week. What did I get done? What needs to be done next week? Kind of do some of that review. That's important. Make sure you're actually making progress on those goals. Then for next week, say, what are the most important 3 things for me to do next week? And then you can build that rhythm into your life, and you'll be amazed at how much more you get done with less time when you prioritize those big rock items like that.
Yeah, that's been huge. Mine is Sunday night, so I'll do my review and looking forward. And even one step that I'll do even beyond that is I determine, out of my big 3 for the week, I'll determine my big 3 for the day, right? That says, okay, if I need, and what I use that as for is gauging whether it's been a productive day or not. Like if I did everything else on my to-do list, but I ignored the things on my big 3, like I know that I was ignoring and kind of like deprioritizing really the things that I needed to do. But if I can check off those big 3 things for the day, I know that, okay, if I can do these, and it's almost like setting at the beginning of the day, if I do these, I know that it'll take me one step closer to that big 3 for the week. That's going to help me move forward.
Yeah, I know. On a, like real practical, we'll post a note at every Friday. So I'll do this afternoon before this is mine. 3 things for this week. I'll write another one for next week. And then the beautiful thing of that is then I come into Monday morning, and usually Friday I'll make my like task list for Monday too. So when I come into Monday morning, I'm not spending a half hour or 2 hours reviewing and trying to catch up. Instead, I'm diving right in and getting stuff done in Monday morning. I'm a morning person, so the earlier I can get started, the more I can just push through right away. That the more beneficial it's going to be. Um, we got just a couple minutes left, so maybe any kind of final thoughts, tips, comments in the way of productivity, Andy.
Yeah, I think, here would be my encouragement is like, don't wait on this. I feel like that I didn't figure a lot of this stuff out until I was like in my 30s, that I feel like I was just kind of like almost gung ho in my 20s, like, I can just do whatever I want and do everything. And I look about like how scattered I was in what I was doing. So even if you're in college, if you're a young ministry leader, 21, 22, 23 years old, like, begin to build some of these things now that I think are going to be so beneficial. And but I still want to, the second thing is I want to go back to where we started at. The goal is not just to hit your big three. The goal is not, like to cross off everything in your list. The goal is, one, is to do the ministry that God ultimately has called you to do in the most effective way. But secondly, so we can, in that ministry, love people, love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength.
Yeah, and I'll reiterate to that idea that, man, it's got to start from a place of rest. Like, don't dive into trying to get a bunch of stuff done if you haven't made space in your life to be with Jesus. Because if so, you're going to be producing the wrong things. Your roots are going to be in the wrong spot, and you're going to produce stuff that's not healthy as a result of that. Um, Maybe one kind of final thought or comment on this. I think it's it's amazing actually how much, when you start to be intentional with strategic use of your time, how much time you'll actually free up. Being productive is not necessarily about quantitatively getting more done in a day. It's about qualitatively having more impact. So for me, like we're probably, I think within Elementum, I don't know if you'd agree with this, Andy, I think we're busier than ever. Last year was a year of significant growth for us, but I feel like I'm actually going into this year, despite the fact that weeks, like we said earlier, are just blowing by, I'm actually getting done with like my work earlier in the day, and having more time to relax, rest with family. I was just thinking about this yesterday afternoon. I got done with everything on my list by, it was like 3:30 or so, and there's other stuff to do. But one of the things I've committed with that idea of working from a place of rest is, once I'm done with my list, I'm not adding more to my list.
Yeah.
I'm not just going to work later just to work later, because I want to say, hey, God, my identity is not in the amount of work I get done. So that means I get an extra hour, hour and a half of time to chill with the kids, sit and read a book, whatever, before we dive into, right? If you're in college and adult ministry, odds are you got plenty of evenings that are full with ministry stuff. So I would love to see out of this, people like implementing some productivity stuff. I would love to see you guys get to the point where you can say, hey, yeah, I'm done with my work by 3 p.m. So I got 2 or 3 hours to chill with my family before I got to go off to the college group or the smaller group or whatever I'm leading. Now, depending on what your work culture, what's expected of you, and for some people that may not be possible, but the key thing is just like, if you are intentional about productivity, you're going to create more space for enjoying the life that God's given you. Last thing I'll mention, just, we already mentioned it, but we're working on a course that's going to be 6-7 sessions or so of some of these. We'll delve significantly deeper into each of these, give you some practical tools and kind of a guide for how to implement some of this stuff in your life. Goal is, we're trying to be productive and get this course out there for you guys by the end of February. So look for it somewhere end of February, or early, whatever month comes after February, March. My brain went blank.
Still March, even in 2021.
Who even knows anymore? Yeah, so that'll be coming out. I think it's going to be super useful for you guys. It's been a lot of fun even pulling it together. Been helpful for some good, helpful reminders for me in the way of getting stuff done. I think that's all we got for today.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Ben. We'll catch everybody next Friday. We'll talk to you later.